Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are, and welcome to our Global Health Tuesday webinar entitled Global Health Grant Trends. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jorge Osorio, and I'm the director of the Global Health Institute. And today's session is part of our monthly Global Health Tuesday webinar series, featuring researchers and practitioners from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and around the world. Today's discussion will focus on the world of grant making and proposal development within the global health space. As we continue to confront global health security challenges, the need for collaborative research and knowledge sharing has never been greater. It is my pleasure to welcome today's panelists, who are leaders in the global health field, and our panelists will provide unique insights about their grant-making organizations and discuss how their office evaluate grants and opinions on areas of great interest moving forward. Before I introduce today's speakers, a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, and the archive video will be available on our website. And also, we are monitoring the chat, so please put your questions and comments for the panelists here. Now, without further additional comments, I'd like to welcome Dr. Chris Karp, who is the Director of Global Health Discovery and Translational Science and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's an immunologist and infectious disease specialist and internist, and Chris joined the foundation in 2012. Prior to the foundation, he also was a faculty at the Departments of Medicine and Molecular Microbiology and Immunology at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And he also founded the Division of Molecular Immunology at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Research Foundation. Chris is a violinist and pianist, and he offers joins the faculty music series at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And let's also welcome Dr. Peter Kilmarx. He's the acting director for the Fogarty International Center and active associate director for international research at the National Institutes of Health. Peter joined the Fogarty as a deputy director in 2015 and assumed his current role in January 2023. Peter is an expert in infectious disease research and HIV and AIDS prevention. He also served as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention country director in Zimbabwe. He has led with Ebola response in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and DRC. So a very sincere thanks to both of you, Chris and Peter, for joining us. And we are looking forward to a very dynamic conversation. So Chris, if you can please lead us with sharing with us information about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you.
So thank you, Jorge. Can you see my screen here? Great. So I put together something I call Demystifying Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The reason for the title, if anybody has been out to Seattle and seen the foundation, it's a gorgeous building with walls of glass, but I must say it's a bit opaque from the outside. So standing back, I'll start by listing what I think are the real comparative advantages of the foundation. The first being a focus on transformational innovation and largely technological, scientific, but not just in that sphere. So one of the first things that the foundation, major things that the foundation helped set up was Gavi, novel financing for vaccine introduction in low and middle income countries. Second, I would put what I call risk capital. So the ability to take risks that pharma will not take and that governments find very difficult given their election cycles, as well as the ability to work on unusual timescales, whether it's getting significant money out to WHO at the beginning of the pandemic within 24 hours, or working on malaria, on falciparum eradication on a timescale of 2045, 2050. Third is convening power and voice. And the fourth really is something that's developed over the 20 years of the foundation, which is deep internal technical expertise across the entire value chain. The foundation started, I would say, as a grant-giving organization. we think an E-Tech vaccine is needed path. Here's $50 million, do something. That was not successful, I would say. And so deep internal expertise across the entire spectrum, privilege, place, and data and information flow. And as opposed to being a granting organization, much more, I would say, investing for impact. Now, what you have today in Peter and myself are representatives of the two largest funders of global health in the world. I put up 2023 charitable spend, which is significant. It's actually going to $8.5 billion in 2024. But the main point of this slide is to emphasize that the global programs are the overwhelming dominant part of the foundation. You see a bunch of divisions here with global in the title: global health, global development, global growth and opportunity, as well as gender equality, which is a global program, and global policy and advocacy. There's a small US program, much smaller US program focused on education. But again, global health and development is the center of the foundation. And $8.5 billion sounds like a lot, and it is, but you have to put that against the, I guess Peter will tell us it's close to $47 billion budget of the NIH. And so the funding is tightly focused on a set of strategies in the global programs. And I've listed at the left here the major strategies in the global programs. You can think of things coming on strategy at the foundation through a set of filters. The first is, again, gets to the equity agenda, those conditions causing the greatest burden of morbidity and mortality among the poorest and most vulnerable, and that by the best data possible. So the foundation has actually put hundreds of millions of dollars into much better ground truth epidemiologic data. What are children under the age of 5 actually dying of in Africa, et cetera? So that's the first filter. The second is that others aren't putting commensurate attention and resources against those problems. For example, there's a wave of type 2 diabetes sweeping the tropics at the moment, but it's hard to say that others, whether it's government, biotech, et cetera, are not in that space. The third gets back to this transformational innovation, a fundamental belief in the transformational power of science and technology. And frankly, the fourth is it's a family foundation. Sometimes things get to the top that wouldn't otherwise. If I were Bill or Melinda, I might have gone for measles eradication before polio, but I'm not. So these are the strategies, and there are so-called program strategy teams or PSTs around each of them that are in some way responsible, everything from developing the strategy through carrying it out. I've put at the right the very highest line goals of these strategies. So with polio and malaria, it's eradication. With HIV and TB, it's acceleration of the decrease in transmission rates in high burden geographies. For the next two syndromic diseases and those under the age of 5, it's reduction of disease burden against those specific pathogens that cause the greatest burden. For the London group of neglected tropical diseases, it's quite pathogen specific. So the aim is eradication of guinea worm and West African trypanosomiasis. Its elimination as a public health problem in WHO speak for the filarial diseases, and its reduction of burden for most of the rest. So the top ones are specific infectious diseases or infectious disease syndromes. Down below gets more to biological and social vulnerabilities underlying risk. So maternal and neonatal child nutrition and health, pretty obvious, maximizing maternal and neonatal health and developmental potential. The newest strategy here is women's health innovations, which focuses on the burden of preventable reproductive and sexual diseases. Family planning, ensuring that all women can make and act on informed choices about family planning. And then there's water, sanitation, and hygiene. Agriculture, which is both crops and livestock, nutrition, and inclusive financial systems. So a very large portfolio. I would say nobody's ever made a convincing argument to me that the foundation works on too few things. Now, as you can imagine, if you go down one level, there are fairly well worked out strategies that get pressure tested every year. So I have an example here of malaria. Again, the aim is eradication of falciparum malaria. the strategy rests on a set of principles down the left. To achieve and maintain local elimination, settings need transmission prevention, case management, low importation, et cetera. Clear need for accurate, timely geolocalized surveillance. Have to stay ahead of the Red Queen evolution. So for existing vector control and case management tools, constant product discovery and development. But with all of that, fundamentally transformational tools are almost certainly required, whether it's gene drive or other novel approaches to vector control, a truly useful vaccine for eradication purposes, single encounter radical cure, and prevention on the drug side, et cetera. And so that's where a large part of the money goes. And then the last two principles here focus on the difficulties in the hardest to reach countries and the need for, in fact, worldwide increased resources and partnerships to drive this. And so the portfolio itself, you can see in the middle, focuses on anti-malarial interventions, drugs, vaccines, biologics, vector control, surveillance, strategic partnerships, global policy and advocacy, et cetera. I think I have another example on the HIV side here. Again, the fundamental vision is accelerating the reduction in incidence of HIV infection in high burden geographies, both through preventing new infections as well as reducing onward transmission. The R&D portfolio, which is the largest part, focuses on long-acting high-efficacy PrEP interventions, as well as vaccines. But again, it's an end-to-end kind of strategy. What's not on here is a separate effort here on gene therapy and vaccine approaches towards HIV cure, sustained control in the absence of continued drug. So this is something of an organogram, give a sense of the complexities here. What I've listed down the center are those same strategies, or the teams that run those strategies. They're color-coded as to the divisions they report into. So the blue ones report into global health, et cetera. We're set up in a matrix fashion, like most pharma. Hold on a second here, I'm having trouble seeing. So cutting across these strategies are a variety of functions. So I lead discovery and translational sciences. Our purview is across all of the health-related strategies in the space between the most upstream R&D and proof of concept in human. There's a vaccine development group, a drug development group that has the regulatory function as well, called integrated development, a very upstream biotech scanning group, the Biotech Accelerator, a large group of modelers, about 100 people, Institute for Disease Modeling, key for most of what we do, and a strategy planning and management group. Downstream, there are similar functions, immunization, et cetera. Country and regional offices under global policy and advocacy. And I'll point out in the bottom left, the Strategic Investment Fund. Most of our funding actually is by grants and contracts, but this is a group that actually takes equity in biotech. We're frequently angel investors with the aim of getting global access and de-risking technologies that have potential application to global health. This is also the group that does advanced market commitments with pharma. It's a huge portfolio. Don't expect anybody to be able to read this, but from the space from preclinical, that is designated candidate selection, through scale up, drugs, vaccines, biologics, diagnostics, the portfolio itself, development portfolio is huge. It's pretty much the scale of any large pharma. And this is us. I mean, we are the upstream funder part here, that which is closest to most work happening in the academy. So the mission of discovery and translational sciences is really to provide the tools that the program strategy team will need, transformational tools, to hit the goals of their strategies. And if if the foundation can work at levels of risk that others find difficult, and frankly is, I think, the best argument for philanthropy on this scale, we actually have extra license on risk. So we work at the goals of the strategies and often along the lines of the strategies, but we have the license to work at the goals, but off-piste, as it were. Classic line being, well, that's not on strategy, unless, of course, it works, in which case the strategy will change. So we fund the discovery and translation of a pipeline of transformational products. We also fund underneath that state-of-the-art cross-cutting platforms to support product discovery and translation. Spend a lot of time de-risking novel technologies, both for unprecedented product types as well as online platforms. And then, although we always hope to stand on the shoulders of blue sky science funded by NIH, MRC, Howard Hughes, especially in global health, there's often fundamental underlying biological ignorance, and so we fund in the upstream space as well. We're organized in what we call domains, as listed below. So 2 tool-centric domains, drug discovery and vaccines and biologics discovery. 1 topic-centric domain, reproductive health technologies, and then 3 cross-cutting functions within the function of discovery. And I'll go through these briefly. So to give a sense of how we work, these are the fundamental initiatives in the drug discovery group. Tuberculosis, where the aim is a novel set of drug candidates, a novel regimen that can be given to anyone. So with TB, that is resistant or not, that will shorten the regimen to 2 months or less. And I will say this is the most developed program we have in the drug space. The TB Drug Accelerator has been ongoing for 12 years or so. It's a very unique a collaboration of, at the moment, 6 fundamental partners, academics, biotech, pharma, working together across the value chain with integration of both tools and data and development of novel tools. The program to date has 12 drug candidates that have entered development, and I actually think we stand a very good chance of reaching the target product profile here of a completely novel regimen, which leads to treatment shortening, is safe enough to be given in the absence of monitoring liver function tests, for example, within the next 5 years. So that's TB. We have a similar malaria drug accelerator, which focuses much more on the upstream target identification. The antivirals program, which is a collaboration with the Novo Nordisk Foundation and Open Philanthropy. You can guess when that started. And finally, novel non-hormonal contraceptives. A perfect Mount Everest for the foundation to be climbing. Huge need, incredibly risky. Pharma won't touch it until it's substantially de-risked. And this is off to a pretty good start. So fundamentally 4 major initiatives on drugs, but underneath that, funding of a variety of platforms, both for drug discovery capacity, a variety of specialized platforms, DNA encoded libraries, et cetera, and chemical diversity above that, which is in pharma's libraries here. So again, funding both initiatives and underlying platforms which are used across those initiatives. The vaccines and biologics, quite a large purview across strategies, as you can imagine, with vaccines being a major way the foundation has been working from the very beginning. I won't go through this in depth. We work across these strategies in a variety of ways, from actually driving the initiatives, especially with novel technologies, or thought partnership with the strategies themselves for precedented technologies like conjugate vaccines. The Global Health Discovery Collaboratory is a fundamentally set up to ensure that the frontiers of technological innovation get to the global health problem set and our grantees in a concerted way, as opposed to 10 years later, which was the usual. So this is a collaborative network of a variety of centers of excellence, including the Institute for Protein Design, University of Washington, Scripps Caliber, and the deep human immunoprofiling and technology development at Stanford, with a variety of platforms and a fundamental aim to provide access to these for all of our grantees in both high and low income countries alike. And as I mentioned, the platforms underlying the drug group's work, those underlying the vaccine group actually sit on the collaboratory platform. So a variety of platforms, both in biotech and in academics, state of the art that can be brought to any of our grantees, whether it's adjuvants and formulations, antibody dynamics, et cetera. Reproductive health technologies, two major initiatives, vaginal microbiome interventions. A diverse inflammatory vaginal microbiome is associated with higher risk for HIV acquisition, HPV persistence, poor birth outcomes, et cetera. And we're now finally, after several years of upstream work in the clinic and experimental medicine trials with consortia of L. crispatus, live bacterial therapeutics. Second major initiative driven out of this is a therapeutic vaccine for HPV. The Foundation's engagement in HPV has traditionally focused on prophylactic vaccines, both funding the development of novel prophylactic vaccines through developing country manufacturers to bring the stocks way up and the cost way down, but also following data from some of the original phase 3 trials that suggested that as opposed to 2 to 3 doses, a single dose of HPV prophylactic vaccine actually is protective, and generating the data for that and taking it all the way to WHO recommendations a year ago, which of course makes it much easier to get uptake. That said, even with the most optimistic modeling of uptake, there's a huge burden of cervical cancer morbidity and mortality over the next 40 years in women who had sexual debut before the ability to have the prophylactic vaccine. So we're working on a therapeutic vaccine aiming to clear virus in such women. This group also works on the non-hormonal contraceptive initiative that I mentioned. We have a newer group on translational sciences, basically to accelerate all of our product candidates through the pipeline. And then finally, the Global Partnerships and Grand Challenges team. The Grand Challenges in global health, 20 years ago, RFP program was actually how the discovery group started. It is what most academics know about the foundation. We still do these branded requests for proposals, although it's a very small part of what we do. And the focus these days is much more on using the RFP engine in the geographies we focus on, which is Africa and South Asia, for finding innovations and innovators there. But again, we still run those RFPs. We have an annual meeting, which is kind of the global health science meeting every year. And this team now really focuses mostly on low and middle income country R&D ecosystem strengthening. I will say that while the foundation started, as many global health funding organizations did, in what I will call a colonial mode, a large grant to Harvard with subgrants to investigators in the geographies, we don't do that at all anymore, and have a major push on equitable partnership and funding in our geographies. And finally, how do we fund? I mentioned the RFPs, a small part of what we do. Often do closed RFPs. These are the 4 groups in the world we think can answer the question, bring them together. Targeted investments in focused areas. I mentioned the program-related investments, equity in biotech. We engage with the wholly owned nonprofit subsidiary, the Gates Medical Research Institute in Cambridge, which is a end-to-end development partner for products that have no high income market potential, and hence pharma is not at all interested. We work with product development partners. We work with pharma, biotech. We work with multilaterals. More and more, we work with co-funders, including the NIH. And as I mentioned, we fund underlying platform technologies. And with that, I will cede things to Peter.
Thank you, Chris. Just before Peter jumps in, thank you so much, Chris. And I like to remind the audience to write their questions in their chat. So, Peter, please go ahead and tell us about your work at the Fogarty and the NID. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks, Jorge. And thanks, Chris. That was actually very informative for me. So now we're shifting gears, and I'm going to talk about Fogarty, where I'm the acting director. And as Jorge mentioned, I'm also the acting associate director for international research in NIH. So I'll be talking about NIH international activities generally. A good place to start is with our mission. And just a reminder that we're fundamentally a scientific research agency. NIH is not USAID. We're not a development agency. We're not CDC. We're not a public health agency. And the mission is really in two parts. The first part is about the basic science that Chris mentioned. The fundamental knowledge is a priority. And then the second part of that is the actual application of that knowledge to improve health. And just to give you a snapshot of the budget, it's the fiscal year 23 budget was $46 billion. And we're still under a continuing resolution so far for this fiscal year. So that continues to be our budget for so far this year. And just to note, there's 27 different institutes and centers at NIH. So very diverse group of federation of organizations. And you can see these are in billions of dollars. So there's the Billionaires Club with the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and pretty much any kind of disease area, special population, organ system. There's an institute or center for that. Fogarty is down with the least amount of funding, the Fogarty International Center on the right there. These are billions of dollars, so that's $95 million, not 9 cents that goes to Fogarty. But we support, work with all the other institutes in their international activities. And so we also get a lot of co-funding from the others. So it's helpful just to quickly take a look at why does the NIH support international research, global health research, and it's again really about the scientific opportunities. And so there's unique populations around the world, especially on genetics has been a focus over the last decade and more. There's unusual exposures and environments, and especially infectious diseases. There's a very strong rationale to want to learn about and prevent Ebola, Zika, and others at their source, where they're getting started, and not to just wait until they're in the U.S. in sufficient numbers to have to be able to do those studies in the U.S. There's also a lot of unique interventions, frugal technologies, mobile health, and other areas. The next bullet, I really want to emphasize the insights and expertise of a diverse set of investigators, really brilliant people around the world that we can collaborate with and learn from. In some areas, for rare diseases, for example, or if a treatment-naive patient population is needed, about 10% of NIH-supported clinical trials have non-U.S. Patient populations, research sites as part of them. There's alternative health systems that we can learn a lot from in the U.S. And I think as many of you are aware, there's, especially in early career people, there's a very strong interest in global health. And then lastly, we clearly need new tools and a really strong research imperative to reach our global health goals. So I'm going to make the case that NIH is truly a global enterprise. We did an analysis a few years ago looking at what percentage of NIH-funded publications have a non-US affiliated co-author. And it turns out it's 35% in 2017 of all NIH-funded publications in PubMed had a non-US affiliated co-author, so more than a third. And then also that second bullet there, we found that those publications that had both US and non-US affiliated co-authors had a greater mean citation impact score. So this metric of scientific impact was greater for these international collaborations. So there's a lot of global collaboration supported by NIH, and it's high impact science. On the left there, you can see the #1 country was actually China in terms of these publications, followed by high income countries. And then on the right, you can see the other low and middle income countries that are well represented in these NIH funded international collaborations. I want to call your attention to an online mapping tool called World Report. It's worldreport.nih.gov. This has the funding information from now I think it's 15 or 16 funding organizations, the biggest international health research funding organizations in the world, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it shows the primary recipient, but also the collaborators. So if you want to look about who's doing malaria research in this country or that country, or some of the other examples I've given there, you can find out where the research is being done and who's funding what and who's getting funded for what around the world. So it's a very rich tool I would recommend to you. And so looking, using World Report, just looking at the NIH funding, this shows where the greatest funding is, the greatest support is. This is looking at numbers of collaborations, not the actual budget information. But you can see the highest are in the high income countries shown there, but there's also a number of low and middle income countries, South Africa, China, Uganda, Kenya, etc., that are represented in this top 100 countries for NIH-supported collaborations. And then that same information to look now by NIH Institute, Center, and Office. Unsurprisingly, it's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases that has the highest number, more than 5,000 supported collaborations from NIAID. Followed by cancer, general medical sciences, heart, lung, and blood, and neurologic diseases and stroke. So there's nearly 20,000 total records here of collaborations supported by NIH is one message, but the key message is that every grant-making NIH Institute and Center, 24 out of 24, supports global health research. So if you're in terms of your grantsmanship, don't just think of the usual suspects, but maybe there's something that the dental institute will be interested in, or maybe it's something in aging, if it's Alzheimer's disease. And then for the Fogarty International Center, our mission is really to support the rest of NIH in their international activities, and especially the partnerships. It's becoming increasingly clear to me how important these partnerships are in advancing research, and especially in these global health emergencies. Having those pre-existing partnerships is so important. And then with our Fogarty funding, we really focus on the training and capacity building in the lower income countries. And so just an overview, there's that many thousands, 7,000 plus scientists worldwide that have received significant research training support through the Fogarty International Center. There's ongoing more than 500 research and training projects and collaborations with more than 100 academic institutions around the world. And it's very broad. It's not, just tropical medicine or infectious diseases. It's really multidisciplinary and very broad, non-communicable diseases, informatics, mHealth, bioethics, implementation science is a real focus for Fogarty. And then just the last line there, there's increasing support and interest across NIH in climate change and environmental health, and Fogarty co-leads, co-chairs the NIH-wide Climate Change and Health Initiative. And so there's strong recognition that climate change and health is a global issue and important to have these global partnerships. I'm just going to highlight a few opportunities for individuals that may be listening and may be interested. The first is the Global Health Fellows and Scholars Program, which is called Launch. This is implemented by 7 consortia of U.S. universities, and so U.S. or low and middle income country researchers can apply through these consortia. This is to have 12 months, a year of mentored research support in a low and middle income country and open to both U.S. and LMIC applicants. The second here is the individual International Research Scientist Development Award. This is a K award that most NIH institutes have for 5 years of mentored research support, career development. The Fogarty K, the grantee has to spend most of their, or at least half of their research time in a low and middle income country, is different from the other NIHK awards. And then the last here, which has been very popular, is the Emerging Global Leader Award. And this is we call it the K43. It's also a 5-year mentored research support, but this is specifically for low and middle income country research scientists. And this is relatively new, unique at NIH, and it's quite broad in terms of the scientific areas, and the other NIH institutes also support and fund this if there's a researcher in the area of another NIH institute. Just a couple of examples of some of our collaborators. Dr. Hugo Garcia is a researcher in Peru. He's been funded through our Global Infectious Disease Research Training Program, strengthening research capacity in Peru. He's with Cayetano University, also works with Johns Hopkins. Over years, he's trained over 90 Peruvian scientists, including master's degrees and PhDs, and really established a center of excellence in infectious disease research in Peru, and is getting over time additional funding from NIAID and from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then another individual to highlight, Dr. Sikaluli Moyo. He was a Fogarty Fellow in that launch program back in 2017 to 2018, looking at the evolutionary trends and dynamics of HIV-1 type C in Botswana. And he's now currently has the K43 5-year Emerging Global Leader Award. And here he's focusing on viral diversity as a potential biomarker for estimates of HIV incidence. And he was quite well positioned in Botswana with this national HIV surveillance program. And so happened to be the first to sequence and report the Omicron variant of SARS-CoV-2. So he's another one of our many global grantees and trainees. So just to wrap things up, I hope I've made the case that there's really quite strong support from NIH across every institute and center for international research and partnerships. And then again, from Fogarty in particular, our focus is on the training and capacity building and engaging the other institutes and centers in their global work. Let me encourage everyone to subscribe to our weekly funding newsletter. This is about opportunities from NIH, but also from others. So when the Gates Foundation has research opportunities, we also include that in our newsletter. We have about 200,000 recipients around the world, so it's a quite popular source of funding news. And just other ways of following us on social media. So I will wrap things up there and look forward to the questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Also, thank you, Chris, for wonderful presentations. And I would like to encourage people in the webinar to post their questions in the chat. We have a few questions right now. A question from John Chan. Peter, could you elaborate on how funding decisions are made at the Fogarty International Center? Does the Fogarty use pay lines? And if you can talk about the decision-making process and the ballpark impact scores that require to be competitive.
Yeah, sure. So I can take a minute just for folks to get on the same page about how the NIH funding works. Most of the funding awards, the research awards from NIH are from unsolicited applications, the so-called R01 program. And so there's these calls for applications and people apply. And then there's these review panels that are actually non-NIH scientists, that experts in the field will review the applications and discuss them and assign scores. It's a little bit counterintuitive that a lower score is considered a stronger application. So a score of 10 is a perfect score. And then we don't, at Fogarty, we don't have specific sort of percentages or pay lines. And we often will fund into the 20s and 30s in terms of the scores. As I mentioned, we get a lot of co-funding from the other institutes, so sometimes we'll have a dozen or so fundable applications, and if other institutes pick up and fund something that's in their area, then we might have additional resources to go lower down the list of the rank order of the scores of the applications.
Thank you, Peter. Chris, I do have a question about the foundation. How does the foundation change post COVID-19? What efforts do you think that have changed the lessons that the foundation learned from COVID?
A great question. So, I mean, maybe along several different axes. So, one thing, of course, is that the urgency of COVID actually got several things across the finish line in terms of de-risking technologies. The foundation had been funding, for example, mRNA vaccines since about 2014, with essentially all of the major companies engaged. And those, of course, finally got over the finish line, an initial finish line, I will say, during COVID, as did, for example, de novo design nanoparticle vaccines with the Skycovione from the Institute for Protein Design, Immunogen getting licensed through SK Bio. So that's one thing. I will say there was also a massive expansion of capacity along the lines of genetic sequencing for surveillance efforts in Africa, which has taken off beautifully, I will say. So there was those sorts of things, and we added a strategy in terms of pandemic preparedness, although, in the usual cycle of the world from panic to neglect with pandemics, we've watched NIH and most funders backing away from work in the pandemic preparedness space, which is disconcerting, to say the least. I will say the other thing that it brought out is fundamentally just the stark lines of inequity, whether it's vaccines getting to Africa, which has led to a fundamental push by the foundation and others to get RNA vaccine capacity into Africa so that there's local production. But it also points out something that remains infuriating to me. So when the North is afraid, as they were during COVID, WHO declares a public health emergency of international scope, and we have things like emergency use authorizations, EUAs and EULs. COVID only killed more people than TB, I think 1 year there. TB is back to being number one. And yet we do not have EULs and EUAs and declarations of emergency for what I would call the residual pandemics. This is something that fundamentally needs to change. So the regulatory path is always incredibly long in the absence of things like that. So
Thank you. That's a great answer. From Beverly, a question, I believe this might be for Peter. Are there opportunities that focus on comparative global health care delivery systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's certainly an interest now with the declining longevity in the U.S. and if you look at sort of value for dollar in terms of how much other countries, peer countries, and even some middle-income countries invest in their healthcare systems versus the longevity. This is an area where the U.S. will have a lot to learn from other countries. So we don't have a specific call for applications in that area from Fogarty, and it hasn't traditionally been a focus for the NIH. It's a little bit challenging in that the NIH isn't the one that actually develops the healthcare systems and implements what the findings would be. So I am not aware of a specific call from other institutes. This would be the kind of thing where you would have to search through and see what is being supported, look for publications or grants in that area and which institutes they're from to be able to find that. And I should note, for any of these, it's always important to actually contact the program officer. So if you're interested in a grant area, research area, there'll be for each institute a program officer, and to email them, contact them, and ask them specifically, because they're going to be the experts on whether the program you're interested in, if that's really the right one. They may refer you to another institute or another funding announcement to be able to find that.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. There's a question about chronic diseases, and I'm wondering if both of you, Chris and Peter, can talk about the importance of working in chronic diseases at both of your organizations. We mostly think about infectious diseases, but if you can comment about the work that is being done in terms of funding chronic diseases.
I can go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. As I was saying, that we really moved beyond the kind of tropical medicine era of global health, and a lot of interest in chronic and non-communicable diseases. And some of the figures that I showed, it's the Cancer Institute, Heart, Lung, and Blood, mental health, diabetes, other institutes are very, very much engaged in chronic disease global research. We participate, the Fogarty International Center represents NIH in the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases, and that's a forum of about a dozen of the major funders of global research working together to coordinate calls for applications and really create a community of researchers around non-communicable diseases, and very consistent with Fogarty's goals, emphasizes implementation, research, and capacity building in low and middle income countries. And so just from Fogarty, we do have an NCD research program, and with that also an NCD research training program, capacity building program. So it's very much an interest of NIH and of Fogarty.
Thank you, Peter. Chris.
Yeah, and so the foundation has not traditionally been in the non-communicable disease space, I will say. So if by chronic disease, the focus is on cardiometabolic disease, again, not on strategy for the foundation. Obviously, there are infectious diseases like HIV, which are chronic, and we're in that space. But the focus on primary prevention, which I see as part of that is the space that the foundation is largely in, both in infectious diseases and related underlying vulnerabilities, nutritional, et cetera.
Great. Thank you. There's a question, Peter, about for the Fogarty, if there is in the study sections, does the Fogarty works like the NIH with the study sections, or is it different?
Yeah, we have usually special emphasis panels for the different reviews of the Fogarty programs, and so it's always a capricious process. You don't know exactly who's on the panel, and it's part of the way that the peer review works, that it's non-NIH experts in the field. But for the Fogarty applications, it generally includes people experienced in global health research as part of the panels reviewing the Fogarty programs.
Okay. And in terms of global health projects, is there a specific particular group that evaluates global health projects?
It's so we work for the with CSR, the center at NIH that manages the reviews, and the Center for Scientific Review, and they will put together and staff panels for the reviews of the different Fogarty programs. So, for example, for our non-communicable disease research program, there'll be a call for applications. There'll be dozens of applications. CSR will put together a special panel to review those applications. And then for the global infectious disease research training program, when those applications come through, there'll be a different panel with expertise in that area to review those applications.
Great, thank you. Chris, so do you feel that are we much better prepared for future pandemics as we are today?
In a word, probably not, unfortunately.
And what do we have to do?
Well, multiple fronts, much better surveillance for one, much better preparatory work on pharmacologic and vaccine approaches to therapy and prevention. So, I mean, as I mentioned, the world goes through a depressingly familiar panic to neglect cycle. So,
Peter, what are your thoughts?
Maybe just to be interesting, I'll have a slightly different view. We're not where we want to be, certainly, but I think we're better off than where we were. I heard Scott Dowell the other day, who from the Gates Foundation, now with WHO, and noting that the countries that experienced SARS-CoV-1 in Asia especially were much better prepared when SARS-CoV-2 came along. And so I think we're going to have many of the same issues, the regulatory issues, the disinformation, et cetera, when disease X or SARS, COVID 2024 comes out, God forbid. But I think with many of the lessons learned, the new partnerships, the muscle memory, et cetera, we'll be somewhat better off than we were before.
Thank you. Thank you. So a reminder to the audience that we will have the slides and the talks in our website. They're being recorded. Do we have any more questions from the audience? And so feel like there's might not be any more questions. So what I might want to do is just to encourage everyone to visit our website at ghi.wisc.edu. And also, I'd like to thank both Chris and Peter for wonderful webinars, and also the audience. I think this was a very exciting and quite well, attended webinar with a lot of questions, a lot of interest. And also like to invite folks for our next webinar, which will be in March 19, Advancing Global Health and Artificial Intelligence. Thank you so much. And I'd like to close by thanking both Chris and Peter for joining the webinar, and everyone in the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to your applications.
Thank you. Bye-bye.